I woke up this morning with one question lingering in my head. How does port forwarding even work? I've learned a lot about this concept and I'm excited to share that in this video. Now, if you've worked in development for a while, especially web development, there've probably been times where you're working on something locally, maybe it's a React, Vue, or Angular application, and you want to be able to share what you're working locally to somebody else on another side of the world. They can be able to view that publicly. Now, instead of having to deploy that application first before they can view it, and if you make another change, you deploy again before they can view it, you can forward that port running on your local environment. With this, you have probably heard about services like ngrok, or even recently I discovered Pingy. These are good services for exposing a local port publicly on the internet for anybody to view. But I still got curious. How does this even work? How can the public internet have access to my laptop, my local environment? Well, let's get into it. Now, when you have a device like a laptop connected to the internet, it is usually connected through a router. You're probably connected on Wi-Fi. One very important thing to know here is that any device available on the internet has a public IP address. This is very useful for the connection between the device and the internet. So even google.com, for example, they have a public IP address. I think nslookup google.com. This is the public IP address here. If I copy that and I open this here, see, it opens google.com. And this router also has a public IP address. And basically, if you should enter that IP address on a browser, even if that device is not connected to the Wi-Fi, you should be able to access the router. But obviously, that will bring security concerns. So different routers would make it impossible for somebody not connected to access the content of that page. But the basic idea is you get the IP address of your router, you can access that router from anywhere. Now, what this router also does is that it assigns a private IP address to the device that is connected to it. And if there are 5 devices connected to this router, you're going to have 5 private IP addresses. That is how the router is also able to keep connection with all of these devices. And don't worry, we'll get to port forwarding. You're probably wondering why are we talking about IP addresses. Now you can actually find this information if you go to your router's dashboard. So this is my router's dashboard. All of this is in Dutch. Let's change that to English. And when we go here to connection, you can see the different connections that I have to this IP address, and all of them have different private IP addresses. Now these are all the private IP addresses, but the router itself has its own public IP address. Now depending on the router you use, you might be able to find this information in different places, but in my case I have to go to system information, and then here on this ETH internet I can find the IP address on this line. Basically, this IP address is available publicly and you can enter this IP address on your URL, but that is not going to work. Actually, when I enter the IP address on my laptop, it's going to work because I'm connected to the internet. But if I should enter that on my phone, as you can see here, it says loading error. Again, for security reasons, somebody should not just know the IP address of my router and be able to go into my router and change things on my router. Now, this is where the port forwarding concept comes in. We can be able to configure this router and say that, hey, when a request comes to this particular port, I want you to forward that request to my local server. Remember again, the IP address of this router is available publicly. Let's just say yyyy.yyyy.yyyy. Now I can say if any request comes to a port 8000, I want you to forward that request to my local device where I have port 8000 actually running. This is the basic idea of port forwarding. Now this is going to show the content of this device localhost 8000. Now I have my Deeecode website here and I'm just going to run this locally. npm run start. And the website is going to be available on localhost 8000. So when I go to localhost 8000, I have this. But this is on my local device. It's not yet available publicly. Now I can go on my router and forward requests to this port. Again, depending on the router you use, the dashboard could be different, but basically you want to go to the NAT page, and then here you have port forwarding. this port forwarding could be somewhere else on your router. And now we can set a port forwarding. I'll just call it local server. You can call it anything. For the WAN interface, I'm just going to leave it as standard. The starting gate, I can set the starting port that I want to be that I want to receive requests or that I want to forward. So this is going to be 8000, and I'm just going to have 8000 here again because this is only the port I want to make available. Now for the IP address, I'm going to set the internal private IP address of the device. So I want to say when you receive a request on this 8000, forward it to this device. Remember, there could be multiple devices connected to this router, but I want to say this is where you should take the request or forward the request to. And then I can find out which one is my current device. Now, some of these devices have names like Mac and MacBook Pro. I think this is my personal laptop and the MacBook Pro is my office laptop. But then I don't know which one is my Mac Mini because the Mac Mini is what I am currently connected to. Now on my Mac here, I can run ifconfig. It's going to throw out a lot of things. Private address is this one here. That is this one here. I can also change the name to Mac Mini so that it knows that, but I'm just going to leave it as it is. Now that I know that information, I can come here and write the information, and the protocol, I'm going to leave it as TCP. I'm going to make this active and I go OK. What I have done here now is when you receive a request on this port, forward that to this internal private address, and that device, which should hopefully have that port open, will be able to process the request. With this, I can now take the public IP address again because that's what is publicly available on the internet. I can take that again on my device. I can enter public address :8000. And then when I try to open it, what we have here is an error. Now, the reason why this is not working, this was also an interesting learning today, is that my current application is available on localhost 8000. Localhost is just for my local machine. This localhost is not going to be available to other devices, even if they are also connected to the same Wi-Fi. This is the same thing as doing 127.0.0.0. This is just for this local machine. So even if my router is actually trying to send a request to my current computer, my application is only available on the local machine level. Now, what I want is I want this to be available on 0.0.0.0, which means listen on all network interfaces. So that way, even my phone, if I'm connected to the Wi-Fi, can access this. I feel like this is something I should have talked about before. When things are connected on the same Wi-Fi, they can be able to access different resources from each other. Now, if I try to do that, you see this is not available here. It's only available on the local machine. So what I can do is, instead of just running npm start, I'm going to run npm start, and I'm going to pass the host option, and I'm going to bind this to 0.0.0.0. So now this is going to be available on all network interfaces. So now if I go to localhost 8000, it's still going to work because I'm still on my computer. But if I go to 0.0.0.0, it's still going to work. As you can see also, it says that on your network, you can go to the private IP address, which is available on the network, and you can go to 8000. So I can choose to also go to this local IP address on my phone. Let me try that. 8000. Now, if I go to that, because I'm connected to the Wi-Fi, you can see that my website shows there. Now, if I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi and I'm connected on local data, when I try to refresh, here you can see loading error, request time now. Because I'm not connected to the Wi-Fi, I cannot access the private IP address and the 8000 port. Obviously, that's not what I want, because if I want somebody from a different location to view my local environment, they would not be able to access my local IP address. They will not be able to connect to the Wi-Fi. But then, because I have this port forwarding set up here to say on the port 8000, when accessed on the public IP, forward it to this internal IP. Now, if I should go to my public IP again, which points to my router, and then I go to localhost 8000, look at that. Let me show you the URL. You can see the URL there. It's public IP :8000. And now I can also share this public IP address with the port to anybody from anywhere, and they'll be able to view what I have running on my local server, as long as it's available. This is a very basic example of port forwarding, where I take advantage of a public IP address, and on a port, I tell my router, point this to this private address, and I can get responses from there. Now, obviously with things like this, you want to be careful. I'm basically giving the public internet access to my local environment. Like on my dashboard here, I can always come here to change the status of this port forwarding. So when I'm done testing or checking what I need to check, I can turn it off. And then whenever my router gets a request on the public IP 8000, it doesn't know what to do with it. So it just ignores it. One tiny thing I forgot to show you was if you come on this website called NoIP, it allows you to basically get domain names for your IP addresses for free. As you can see here, I added a domain name for my router IP address. The domain name is portdemo, and then it has .3utilities.com. So basically if I do port demo 3utilities.com and I put the port 8000 again, you can see it actually works, and I can share this IP address to anybody on the internet so they don't have to remember the 1 2 3 4 5 6. Just remember this URL, which is still not the nicest, and then this port, and it goes well. Now when you think about services like ngrok and Pingy, they are doing something similar to this. Basically they are doing the job of this router. Obviously they do more than that, there's more security, but they're basically doing this job of this router. You say on ngrok and Pingy, when you make a request to them, depending on the URL that they give you, somebody on the internet is making a request to the URL that they gave you, they are now able to somehow forward that request to your device. Now the question is how, and this is something that I would want to look more in a different video because this video is just long enough. They forward it somehow to this device. Now I haven't looked so much into how ngrok does this. I think ngrok provides an agent that you have to install in your device, and this agent is able to establish that connection between your device and the ngrok server. I think from my little research, that's what I saw. Now if you look at our router here, we don't need to establish a connection ourselves, because if you are connected to the router, that is already a connection, and so the router can forward a port to your device. But in the case of ngrok, by itself, ngrok is not connected to your device, but then with the help of this agent, you can then establish a connection on a particular port where the ngrok server, when it receives a request, it can direct that request to your device. In the case of Pingy, how it does it is that it establishes an SSH connection with your device. So basically from your device, you have an SSH connection with Pingy, and that connection helps Pingy to be able to point a request on a particular port to your local machine. One very important thing I thought to address while editing this video was that the fact that you can do port forwarding on your router doesn't mean that should replace using services like ngrok and Pingy, unless you really know what you're doing. The truth is, when you expose a port to the public internet, that brings a lot of security risks. And if you know what you're doing, you can protect yourself against all of those things. But if you're somebody like me who is not very vast or professional in security or knowing what layers to cover or firewalls, I would rather use ngrok and Pingy or any other services online instead of just configuring my router. So my advice is, if you want to do a quick local environment exposure to a friend, a colleague, to see what you're doing, you can use your router for that, because usually this ngrok and Pingy, they might ask you to also pay some money, and you can avoid paying that money and just changing things on your router. And as soon as you are done with that connection, your colleague has seen what you're working on, you can remove that port forwarding. You can do that. But if you want to have a long-lasting port forwarding connection open, like for example, the security camera I have in my home, I worked on that myself, and I have a local environment running. I think it's been running for like 2 weeks now. Now that's something I would not want to open on my router. I would rather do the port forwarding with these other services. So just thought to put that out there, that this is not the replacement for using ngrok and Pingy. ngrok and Pingy and other services, they offer many more features than just port forwarding. They offer security against DDoS attacks, security on the tunnel, different things that would really benefit you instead of just opening a port to the public internet on your router. I hope this was helpful. Let me know what questions you might have in the comment section and anything else you would like me to touch on. I'm not a security expert, so please reserve your security questions, but on other technicalities, you can let me know in the comments.